When people speak of suffering, they usually point to events: the sudden loss of a job, the shattering of a marriage, the death of someone dear. It feels obvious to conclude that pain comes from those events themselves, that the world hurls cruelty at us and leaves us no choice but to crumble. But if we look closely, through the lens of philosophy, psychology, even history, the story is different. The wound is real, yes, but the depth of the scar depends on how our mind chooses to interpret it. Carl Jung expressed it with brutal clarity. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. At first glance, it feels cryptic, but hidden within it is a truth as sharp as glass. Suffering is not dictated by reality, but by the meanings we attach to reality. Imagine two men, both laid off from the same factory in Detroit during a downturn. One spends the night drowning in bourbon, convinced the universe has marked him as worthless. The other, equally stunned, wakes the next morning with a grim determination to retrain, to reimagine his life. Same event, two radically different fates. What made the difference? Not the pink slip on the table, but the story each man told himself about it. This pattern repeats across centuries. Ancient Stoic philosophers knew it well. Epictetus, born a slave, insisted that man's true chains are not forged from iron but from interpretation. The Buddhists, halfway across the world, taught the same. Pain is inevitable, but suffering, the clinging to pain, the insistence that life must unfold according to our script, is optional. And in America's own frontier past, pioneers pushed wagons across hostile plains, some collapsing under despair, others seeing each hardship as proof of their resilience. The human mind, it turns out, is a storyteller. It takes the raw footage of life, its betrayals, its failures, its moments of humiliation, and edits it into a film we call My Life. If the editing leans toward tragedy, we sink. If it tilts toward growth, even disaster becomes an unlikely teacher. Jung's insight cuts through centuries of human lament. We are not destroyed by events themselves, but by the unconscious meanings stitched beneath them. Rejection, for example, is rarely about the word no. It becomes agony because somewhere in the shadows of our psyche lies an old wound. Abandonment in childhood, an insecurity picked up in adolescence, a fear whispered by culture that we are never enough. Consider the humiliation of being mocked at a dinner table or abandoned by someone we trusted. The sting is real, but the lasting wound comes from the private story. I am unworthy. I will always be betrayed. Life is cruel to me. That narrative, not the moment itself, is what chains us. Think of history's great collapses and survivals. During the Great Depression, countless families lost homes, farms, and pride. Many never recovered, not because the economic devastation was greater for them than for their neighbors, but because despair calcified into their worldview. And yet others clawed their way forward, fueled by the stubborn belief that the disaster could not define them. Same breadlines, different stories, different outcomes. This is where the curiosity sharpens. If the unconscious edits the film of our life, are we trapped? Are we doomed to watch suffering play out on a loop? Jung would say no, because the moment we recognize the editing process, the illusion of fate cracks. Awareness is the first knife that cuts through suffering. And so, the origin of suffering reveals itself, not in the pink slips, not in the betrayals, not in the graves we visit, but in the mind's invisible hand shaping meaning. This is the first revelation, and it begs a larger question. If suffering is made by interpretation, then could liberation be found in changing the interpretation? Could peace be manufactured in the very same workshop where despair is born? That question, uncomfortable and electric, is what we must carry forward. Stand at a crossroads in life long enough and you'll see it. Two people, side by side, facing the same event, yet walking away with two utterly different stories. A door slams in their faces. One sinks into the dust, muttering about destiny's cruelty. The other wipes the dust off his boots and mutters something else entirely. Better doors will open. The event is the same, the wound identical. But the mind has split into two paths, one leading to despair, the other to liberation. Consider rejection in love, that most universal of human experiences. To one heart it becomes a death sentence, confirmation that I am unworthy, unlovable, destined to be abandoned. To another it becomes a kind of rescue. This wasn't the person for me, and now there is space for someone who truly values me. Same breakup, two realities. The difference isn't in the partner who left, but in the story crafted afterward. Modern psychology has caught up with what ancient wisdom and Jung himself were already pointing toward. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most studied approaches in psychology, rests on this very principle. Our thoughts, not events, determine how we feel. The same dismissal at work can be seen as proof of inadequacy or as a challenge to sharpen one's craft. In one story, shame thrives. In the other, motivation sparks. But here's the trap most of us fall into. Our interpretations are rarely clean. They are colored, distorted by the wounds we carry unresolved. If abandonment haunts your past, you will see rejection everywhere. If insecurity shadows your steps, you will hear insults even where none were spoken. The mind, like a cracked lens, warps the light of reality. Jung called it the unconscious, the parts of ourselves we have not made peace with, writing scripts behind the scenes of our lives. History illustrates this with a kind of merciless clarity. Take the fall of Rome. For some citizens, the crumbling walls meant only doom, proof that the gods had cursed them. For others, the chaos was opportunity, a chance to carve new kingdoms from the rubble. The event, Rome's collapse, was one. The interpretations multiplied like wild branches. One bore the fruit of despair, the other of reinvention. Culture, too, shapes these forks in the road. In some societies, failure is a stigma that clings for life. In others, particularly in America's entrepreneurial mythos, failure is a badge of honor, proof that you dared. Where one person hides, another boasts of scars. And again, it is the story, not the scar, that determines whether the wound festers or heals. Think of your own life for a moment. That job you didn't get, the friendship that fractured, the night you walked home alone. How many times did the real pain come not from the event itself, but from the whispering story? I will never succeed. People always betray me. I am alone, and will always be. This is how the mind deepens suffering, turning single cuts into lifelong wounds. But there is always a choice, always two paths. And here lies the power Jung hinted at, the power modern neuroscience is only beginning to measure. The human brain is plastic. It can rewire, rethink, reinterpret. It can turn rejection into redirection, failure into training, humiliation into a strange kind of fuel. This is not just poetic, it is biological. Every time you choose the second path, you strengthen it. Every time you resist the first, the despairing narrative grows weaker. The real issue then is not whether life will hand us pain, it will, but whether we will hand ourselves suffering on top of it. Pain is the cut, suffering is the story. And every moment we stand at that fork, holding the pen that will decide what kind of story gets written next. So the question sharpens. If our perception writes the script of our suffering, then what happens when we begin rewriting? Could it be that liberation is not about changing life itself, but about changing the way we see it? That, unsettling as it sounds, is the path we must begin to walk. If distorted perception is one architect of suffering, resistance is its twin. We live much of our lives in a kind of arm wrestle with reality, demanding that it bend to our will. We want people to behave the way we imagine they should. We want events to unfold exactly as we've scripted them in our minds. And when they don't, as they almost never do, we suffer, not because of the event itself, but because of our refusal to accept it. Carl Jung, echoing wisdom older than any one culture, pointed to attachment as a root of suffering. We cling to people, to ideas, to identities, and then we bleed when life refuses to obey our grip. The truth, harsh and liberating at once, is that life owes us nothing. The sooner this sinks in, the sooner we are freed from the prison of control. Think of how often this plays out in ordinary lives. You pour yourself into a relationship, convinced that if you just love enough, the other person must stay. Yet they leave. You invest years into a career path, planning each step with military precision, only to see the company fold in a merger. The wound is real, but what deepens it is the belief that the universe should have complied with your plans. History is littered with examples of leaders who broke themselves against the rocks of resistance. Napoleon, refusing to yield to the Russian winter, marched deeper into disaster until his army dissolved in the snow. On the other side of history, great survivors, whether it was Abraham Lincoln bending with political storms or Franklin Roosevelt improvising solutions during the Depression, proved that flexibility, not control, is what sustains. To resist reality is to shatter against it. To flow with it is to endure. And yet the temptation to control is constant. We try to mold our children into mirror images of ourselves. We demand friends stay exactly as they were 10 years ago. We clutch at routines as if they were life rafts. All the while, the river of life keeps flowing, dragging us along whether we fight or not. No wonder the anxiety grows heavier. We are thrashing against currents we never stood a chance of stopping. In American idioms, the wisdom has long been hidden in plain sight. Roll with the punches. Go with the flow. Don't cry over spilled milk. Each saying is a whisper of surrender, not in the sense of giving up, but of loosening the iron grip of control. Life, unpredictable and unruly, will always spill the milk. The question is whether you spend your years mopping in anger or moving forward with a shrug. There is a practice, deceptively simple, that brings this truth home. Write down everything that worries you. Then divide the list into 2 columns, what you can control and what you cannot. You may be startled, even embarrassed, to discover how many of your anxieties fall into that second column. Other people's opinions, the weather, the past, the beating of another heart. These are beyond you. And yet, these are often the very things we clutch hardest. Jung's point, like the Stoics before him, was not that life must be sterile or emotionless. It was that peace is found when we stop resisting the inevitable. The storm will come, the economy will dip, people will betray. None of these things alone have the power to destroy us. It is the inner scream, "This should not be happening," that tears us apart. The paradox is sharp. The more you fight for control, the more fragile you become. The more you release control, the more resilient you are. Resistance is suffering's oxygen. Acceptance is the suffocation of suffering. And so the challenge becomes clear. If perception determines how pain is felt, then resistance determines how long it lingers. The next step is not to tighten our grip on life, but to learn, with patience and practice, how to let go. Letting go is one of those phrases people toss around lightly, almost like a slogan. Just let it go, they say, as if dropping a heartbreak or disappointment were no harder than setting down a cup of coffee. But in reality, letting go is less about a single decision and more about a discipline, a way of living that must be practiced over and over until the grip of resistance slowly loosens. When Jung spoke of attachment as a root of suffering, he was not prescribing apathy. He was pointing toward a freedom that comes only when we stop demanding that life conform to our scripts. In the East, this idea has been cultivated for centuries. Taoist philosophy calls it Wu Wei, the art of effortless action, of moving with the current rather than thrashing against it. Buddhism, too, insists that clinging is the cause of suffering, because clinging to what inevitably changes is like trying to hold water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. But this isn't only Eastern wisdom. American culture, in its plain-spoken way, has long understood the power of acceptance. Farmers in the Dust Bowl of the 1930s learned to adapt to ruined harvests, moving their families westward with little more than hope in their pockets. Soldiers returning from war found peace not by pretending the trauma didn't happen, but by learning to live alongside it, to accept that what was lost would never return, yet life could still be built anew. To practice letting go begins with a simple question: what in this moment is beyond my control? When a plan unravels, instead of wrestling with it, speak the phrase out loud. This is what it is. I accept it and move forward. It may feel hollow at first, like reciting lines from a play you don't quite believe. But repetition matters. Each time you say it, you are retraining the mind to release its grip. One exercise is especially revealing. Make a list of everything weighing on you today. A tense relationship, a dwindling bank account, a conversation replaying in your mind. Then divide these into two columns: what you can influence and what you cannot. If your child struggles in school, you can offer help, but you cannot climb into their mind and take the test for them. If the weather ruins your plans, you cannot change the sky, but you can change how you respond to the rain. Suddenly, the map of your suffering changes. You see clearly that most of your turmoil springs from things that were never yours to command. This shift doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop wasting energy in the impossible. Acceptance is not passivity, it is clarity. The sailor who accepts the wind does not give up. He adjusts the sails. The athlete who accepts an injury does not surrender. She trains differently, reshaping her path. Letting go is simply the art of refusing to fight battles that cannot be won. The challenge, of course, is fear. We hold on tightly because we believe if we loosen our grip, everything will collapse. But the truth is often the opposite. How many friendships have soured because one person tried too hard to control the other? How many dreams have turned to ash because they had to unfold exactly as envisioned, leaving no room for adaptation? Loosening the grip may feel terrifying, but it allows life to unfold in ways we could never have planned. Here is a one-week challenge. Every time something doesn't go as planned, resist the instinct to rage or despair. Instead, breathe and speak. This is what it is. I accept it and move forward. When you feel the urge to control someone else, pause and remind yourself, each person has their own journey. I can walk beside them, but not drag them. At the end of each day, reflect. How free was I today from the need to control? Something remarkable begins to happen. Anxiety loosens. The weight of frustration eases. You discover that you can stand in the middle of uncertainty and not collapse. And in that discovery, you begin to taste the kind of peace Jung was pointing toward, a peace not born from a perfect life, but from the freedom of no longer fighting the inevitable. But even as we practice letting go of what lies outside us, another battlefield remains. Because suffering does not come only from the world around us. Much of it rises from within, the surges of anger, fear, sadness that catch us off guard and drag us under. To truly loosen suffering's grip, we must turn inward to the storm of emotions and learn not only to feel them, but to master them. Even if we accept that much of life is beyond our control, suffering does not dissolve overnight. Because the battlefield is not only outside us, it rages within. Our emotions, when unmastered, can be like sudden storms, tearing through our lives with no warning. Anger surges and words are spoken that cannot be unsaid. Fear rises and we retreat from opportunities. Sadness spreads like fog until every light seems dim. If we do not learn to steer through these storms, then even in a peaceful world, we will drown. Carl Jung saw this with startling clarity in his notion of the shadow, the hidden part of ourselves we push away because society teaches us it is unacceptable. We deny our anger, and so it erupts at the worst moments. We bury our fear, and so it festers, paralyzing us when courage is needed most. We cover our sadness, and so it seeps into everything, tinting our entire world gray. The shadow does not disappear just because we pretend it isn't there. Instead, it becomes a jailer, ruling us from the dark. Imagine being at sea. Your emotions are the waves. If you thrash against them, they overwhelm you. If you surrender completely, they drag you under. But if you learn to ride them, to surf them, you can move with the water rather than against it. This is the essence of emotional mastery, not destroying emotions, but transforming your relationship to them. Consider anxiety. The problem is rarely the physical sensations themselves, the racing heart, the restless mind. The problem is our resistance, the thought, "This is unbearable, I must escape it." Fear is the same. Fear in itself is a natural signal of danger, but when we interpret it as evidence of weakness, it becomes a cage. Sadness is not always the end. It can be a message that something within us needs attention. Emotions are not enemies. It is our interpretation, once again, that makes them destructive. Jung urged us to stop identifying with our emotions, to say not, "I am angry," but "I am experiencing anger." That single shift creates distance. You are no longer the storm. You are the observer watching clouds pass overhead. The moment you step back, you reclaim control. Practical tools make this real. The simplest is conscious breathing. When emotion surges, the body leaps into survival mode, as if a lion were in the room. A slow breath in for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 6, sends a signal to the brain. There is no lion. You are safe. Clarity returns. Another tool is writing. Pour the emotions onto paper before acting on them. Often, when we see our fear or anger in ink, it shrinks, no longer the towering monster it felt like inside. And emotions, if not expressed constructively, become trapped. Anger, if bottled, corrodes. But if channeled into exercise, into art, into honest speech, it becomes energy in motion. Anxiety, if left unspoken, swirls endlessly. But if walked out on a trail or shared with someone trusted, it loses its grip. Sadness, when locked away, becomes despair. But when shaped into words, songs, or even tears, it becomes release. History offers proof of this hidden alchemy. Soldiers in World War II returned home with unspoken shadows, their anger and grief poisoning families for decades. Compare them with those who found ways to express and integrate what they'd seen through writing, through art, through talking with fellow veterans. The event was the same. The handling of emotion decided whether the rest of their lives became prisons or open fields. Modern science now backs this truth. Neuroscience shows that naming emotions, literally saying, "This is fear, this is anger," reduces the brain's panic response. Gratitude practices, even in the smallest doses, rewire neural pathways to lean toward calm rather than despair. We are not doomed to be tossed by every storm. We can train the mind to navigate just as surely as a sailor learns the sea. Emotional mastery does not mean feeling less. It means feeling fully, but not being ruled. It means walking into fear and saying, "You may walk beside me, but you do not lead me." It means facing sadness and saying, "I see you, but you will not bury me." It means holding anger long enough to hear what it has to say before choosing whether its message is worthy of action. And here lies the pivot. Once you learn to master the storm within, something astonishing happens. You become less vulnerable to the manipulations of others, less rattled by the chaos of life. You stop being a puppet to every emotional tug. peace for the first time becomes possible even in the middle of turmoil. But there is still a deeper chain we must break. Because even as we calm our inner storms, many of us cling to an identity that keeps us shackled. It is the identity of the victim, the belief that life is against us, that salvation must come from outside. To move fully beyond suffering, we must confront this trap. When you learn to pause, to breathe, to write, to name the emotions that once swept you away, you begin to taste freedom. But there is another step, a deeper one. Because even if you manage to surf the waves of fear or anger, suffering will return if you still live as their slave. To be free, you must not only manage emotions in the moment, you must master the relationship you have with them entirely. Think of how easily we are manipulated by feelings. A single insult can ignite rage. A cold glance can trigger days of self-doubt. A moment of fear can make us abandon years of preparation. Politicians, advertisers, even those closest to us know this truth. Control the emotions, and you control the person. If your anger, fear, or longing can be played like strings, you are not free. You are a puppet waiting for someone else to tug. Modern neuroscience has shown why this happens. When a strong emotion rises, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, flares. Blood rushes away from the reasoning centers toward survival instincts. In those moments, clarity vanishes, and all that remains is reaction. This is why naming emotions matters. The simple act of saying, "This is anger," pulls the experience into the rational brain, cooling the fire. Jung understood this long before neuroscience caught up. By making the unconscious conscious, we regain power. Examples of emotional mastery are written all over history. Think of Abraham Lincoln, bombarded with ridicule and insult throughout his presidency, yet refusing to lash out in petty revenge. Or Martin Luther King Jr., who stood in front of jeering crowds and violent mobs and chose words of hope instead of hatred. Their restraint was not weakness, it was power. They refused to be slaves to the emotions their enemies tried to provoke. And in that refusal, they became unbreakable. In ordinary life, the same principle holds. The coworker who undermines you, the friend who betrays you, the stranger who cuts you off in traffic. In each moment, the question is the same. Will you be dragged by the leash of emotion, or will you hold the leash yourself? Practical steps make this real. Before reacting to someone, count to 10. Breathe. Ask yourself, is my reaction serving me, or is it serving my wound? When a negative emotion arises, name it out loud. This is fear. This is frustration. This is anger. Suddenly, the emotion is no longer the master. You are. Keep a daily log. When did I feel strong emotion? How did I react? And how might I respond differently next time? The simple act of review strengthens awareness. And don't overlook gratitude. It may sound simple, even cliché, but daily gratitude shifts the brain's default wiring. If anger narrows your view to offense, gratitude widens it back to possibility. If sadness blinds you to light, gratitude reminds you of what still glows. Over time, gratitude builds a buffer, making emotions less explosive, less likely to enslave you. There is a kind of calm that comes from this practice. You stop being rattled so easily. People who once had the power to manipulate you with a cutting word or silent withdrawal lose their grip. Problems that once felt like crushing disasters now appear as puzzles, sometimes even opportunities. Life becomes steadier, not because it has grown kinder, but because you have grown stronger. But here's the truth that stings. Even emotional mastery is not enough if you still see yourself as life's victim. If you cling to the belief that the world is unfair, that others hold your destiny, that salvation must come from outside, you will remain trapped. Emotional freedom gives you calm, but unless you also step out of the victim's identity, you will never walk fully free. And that is where we must turn next, to the hidden chains of the victim mindset and the radical freedom that comes from breaking them. There is a mindset more dangerous than anger, more corrosive than fear, and more paralyzing than sadness. It is the mindset of the victim. It whispers, "The world is against me. I have no control. Others must save me." And once this identity takes root, suffering multiplies, because every hardship becomes proof that you are powerless, every obstacle another nail in your coffin. Carl Jung, ever relentless in his observations, warned that nothing keeps us chained more than our refusal to take responsibility for our lives. The shadow, the emotions, the interpretations, these can all be worked with. But if you decide that life itself is an enemy and you are its eternal casualty, then no practice, no philosophy, no therapy can break you free. The victim mindset thrives on 3 beliefs. First, I have no control over my life. You tell yourself fate is a cruel master, that luck alone dictates everything. Second, the world is unfair to me. This thought convinces you that life owes you something, that you are cursed to suffer while others glide through unscathed. Third, I need others to fix me, to validate me, to rescue me. And so you wait for a savior, a lucky break, a moment of cosmic fairness that never arrives. History is thick with people who clung to this mindset until it destroyed them. Entire communities, after wars or disasters, remained paralyzed for decades, convinced they were helpless victims of forces too large to fight. And yet, in the same soil, others grew strong, deciding to take what little control they had and build from it. Holocaust survivors like Viktor Frankl discovered purpose even in concentration camps, proving that though the world can take everything, it cannot take the choice of how to respond. Everyday life is filled with subtler examples. The employee who insists they will never succeed because the boss hates me. The partner who stays in a toxic relationship because I can't leave, I have no power. The student who blames every failure on unfair teachers instead of their own effort. These narratives become prisons, but prisons with unlocked doors. The only barrier is belief. Breaking free requires a ruthless act of honesty. Listen to the way you describe your life. Do you say, "This always happens to me. I never get a break. People always let me down"? Each sentence reinforces chains. Change the script. I choose how to respond. I can change my situation. My past does not dictate my future. The story you tell yourself is the life you will live. Practical exercises make this shift real. Write down 3 areas where you feel stuck, powerless, or perpetually unlucky. Then ask, what action, however small, could I take to prove I am not powerless here? It might be as simple as learning a skill, making a phone call, setting a boundary. The point is not to solve everything overnight. The point is to shatter the illusion that you are helpless. Challenge 2, your need for external validation. Many remain victims not because the world beats them down, but because they wait endlessly for recognition or fairness. But the world is not always fair, and applause is not always forthcoming. If you depend on others to validate your worth, you remain shackled to their whims. True freedom begins when you decide, I do not need your approval to move forward. The first step out of victimhood is action, any action. A small one, even a trivial one, is enough. It proves to you that control exists, that you are not as powerless as the narrative insists. Each act of agency, however minor, weakens the victim identity until it cracks. And here lies the paradox. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to save you, you realize no one was coming, and that this is a blessing. Because in that moment you understand the power was yours all along. You were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to rescue yourself. But to walk free from victimhood is not just about reclaiming control. It is also about finding a reason to endure, a purpose greater than your pain. Because once you have that, suffering itself transforms. And that is where we must turn next. If breaking free from the victim mindset gives you back responsibility, then purpose gives you direction. Responsibility alone can keep you standing, but purpose is what makes you walk forward when every step feels heavy. Without it, suffering is nothing but torment. With it, suffering becomes fuel. Carl Jung believed that self-realization, the integration of all aspects of ourselves, was not about escaping pain, but about discovering meaning through it. Pain, in his eyes, was not punishment, but signal. It was the psyche's way of pointing to what must be faced, healed, or transformed. To ignore suffering is to miss its lesson. To use it is to evolve. History confirms this again and again. Take Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in Auschwitz, watching friends and family die beyond him. He wrote later in Man's Search for Meaning that those who survived were not always the strongest physically, but those who had a reason to endure, a loved one waiting, a vision of work still unfinished, a faith that their suffering itself had purpose. Or consider the American civil rights leaders who marched under threat of violence. They endured jail cells and beatings not because they enjoyed pain, but because they carried a cause larger than themselves. Their suffering was stitched into a story that transcended the moment. Even in quieter lives, purpose reshapes pain. A parent endures sleepless nights and endless worry because the purpose of raising a child makes it worthwhile. A student struggles through years of study because the purpose of becoming a doctor lights the path. Remove the purpose and the same effort becomes unbearable. Add it and even the harshest trials become survivable. The key is to stop asking only, "Why am I suffering?" and to start asking, "What can this suffering serve?" If heartbreak has shattered you, perhaps it can fuel empathy for others in despair. If failure has humbled you, perhaps it can sharpen your wisdom for the next attempt. If illness has struck you, perhaps it can awaken gratitude in ways health never did. Purpose does not erase pain, but it transforms the relationship you have with it. Ask yourself, how can I use this suffering to learn about myself? What part of me is being forced to grow? How can I shape this experience into something that helps others? The answers will not arrive all at once, and they may shift over time. That is part of the journey. Purpose evolves, just as we do, and often our deepest wounds point directly toward our purpose. Those who have suffered abandonment sometimes devote their lives to helping others feel less alone. Those who have endured injustice often burn with passion to see justice done. Those who have survived disaster sometimes become guides for others walking through fire. Pain, when faced honestly, can become a compass pointing to the work we are meant to do. But purpose need not always be grand or heroic. It may be as simple as raising your children with kindness, writing stories that touch a few lives, building something beautiful in your corner of the world. The scale does not matter. What matters is that the purpose is greater than the pain, and therefore gives the pain context. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. To become who you are truly meant to be is not to float free of suffering, but to weave suffering into your identity, to allow it to shape you into something whole. Without shadow, there is no light. Without trial, no strength. Without purpose, suffering is unbearable. With purpose, it becomes teacher, sculptor, even ally. So the invitation is simple, but not easy. Find something beyond yourself, beyond the immediate wound, that makes endurance meaningful. Search for what ignites you, what keeps you moving when everything else tells you to stop. Because when you discover that purpose, suffering no longer feels like a sentence. It feels like initiation. And once we see suffering as initiation rather than punishment, we are ready for the final step, to integrate shadow and light, pain and growth into a life not defined by despair, but transformed by it. We began with the idea that suffering is not born in events, but in the way we interpret them. We followed the thread through distorted perception, through resistance and control, through the storms of emotion, through the trap of victimhood, and into the discovery of purpose. Now we stand at the end of this journey where the pieces weave together into something larger, a life transformed, not by avoiding pain, but by integrating it. Carl Jung insisted that self-realization is not about becoming light alone, but about embracing shadow too. To deny pain, to deny fear, to deny failure is to remain incomplete. Integration means standing in the middle of the battlefield, seeing both the scars and the victories, and accepting them as part of the same story. There is no light without shadow, no strength without weakness, no growth without trial. History proves the same. Societies that crumbled were those that tried to cling to illusions of permanence, denying their flaws until collapse. Those that endured were the ones that faced shadow honestly. America confronting civil war, Japan rebuilding after atomic devastation, Germany reckoning with its darkest hours. The individual's path is no different. Deny your suffering, and it rules you in secret. Confront it, integrate it, and it becomes fuel. Think of those you admire most, the resilient parent who raised children after loss, the friend who turned addiction into recovery, the leader who guided others through crisis. Their greatness was not forged in ease, but in suffering transformed. They did not avoid pain, they used it. They took the stories of despair and rewrote them into stories of resilience. And that is the final truth. Suffering is inevitable, but suffering does not have to define you. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every failure can become either the prison or the teacher. You choose which story to tell. You choose how heavy the shadow will be and how brightly the light will shine through it. If today you feel consumed by pain, remember this: you are not alone, and you are not trapped. Your story is not finished. The interpretation can change. The grip of control can loosen. The storm of emotions can be calmed. The victim identity can be shattered. And beyond it all, a purpose waits, a reason strong enough to make the suffering worth something. Ask yourself not, why is this happening to me? But, how can I use this to become the person I was meant to be? In that single shift, pain ceases to be a curse and becomes a compass. You stop being merely a survivor and start becoming an author, the one who chooses how the story unfolds. Jung left us a hard but liberating truth. Integration is the path to wholeness. And wholeness does not mean perfection. It means carrying your scars with dignity, your shadows with honesty, your light with courage. When you do that, suffering loses its power to break you. It becomes instead the very ground on which your strength is built. So if you are listening now, know this: your pain is not the end of your story. It is the rough draft. And you, with awareness, acceptance, mastery, responsibility, and purpose, hold the pen.